Good evening, traveler. Tonight, we open the gates to one of the greatest tales of the ancient world. A tale of fire and ice, of courage and cruelty, of ambition and ruin. It is the story of a man whose very name became a shadow over Rome, a whisper of fear on the lips of senators and soldiers alike. That name was Hannibal. But before we walk with him across snowy mountains and blood-soaked fields, before elephants thunder through narrow passes and legions collapse in encirclement, we must look back. For no man, however great, rises in isolation. Hannibal's story begins long before his birth, in the salt winds of the Mediterranean, in the wealth of a city called Carthage, and in the bitter ashes of a war that would shape his destiny forever. The city of Carthage. Imagine the coast of North Africa, where the blue Mediterranean crashes against sunlit cliffs and golden harbors. There, on the Gulf of Tunis, stood Carthage, mistress of the seas, jewel of Phoenician inheritance, a city of traders and sailors. Founded, legend tells, by Dido, a queen who fled from Tyre, Carthage was no ordinary colony. It grew rich on commerce, sending ships across the sea to Spain for silver, to Sicily for grain, to far Britain for tin. In its harbors, fleets gathered by the hundreds, sleek triremes and heavy merchantmen, their sails filled with the promise of profit and power. If Rome was a land power, farmers turned soldiers, disciplined legions pressing outward across Italy, Carthage was her opposite. A naval power, a city of merchants and wealth, commanding the waves. Its walls, massive and gleaming, stretched for miles. Within, temples rose to Baal Hammon and Tanit, gods of fire and fertility. Its council was led by Sephites, magistrates chosen from among the city's aristocracy, advised by elders, driven always by profit and survival. But Carthage's true strength lay not only in its ships, but in its ability to hire war. Unlike Rome, where every citizen was bound to take up arms, Carthage often paid mercenaries. Iberians, Libyans, Numidians, Gauls, fierce warriors drawn from across the Mediterranean. Gold bought swords, and swords defended trade. For centuries, Carthage prospered. Yet prosperity always invites rivals. Rome and Carthage, uneasy neighbors. Across the sea, Rome was rising. No longer a small town on the Tiber, Rome had conquered Italy itself, forging alliances and legions that bound the peninsula under its command. At first, Rome and Carthage were not enemies. They had even signed treaties dividing influence. Carthage would rule the seas, Rome the land. For a time, their interests did not collide. But at the heart of the Mediterranean lay Sicily, fertile, wealthy, and strategically placed. Whoever held Sicily could dominate trade, could command the Central Sea, could strangle the other. Inevitably, Sicily became the spark. The First Punic War, 264 to 241 BCE. It began, as so many great conflicts do, with a local quarrel. A band of mercenaries, the Mamertines, seized the city of Messana. Rome and Carthage were both drawn in. Neither would retreat, for neither could afford to lose face. What followed was 23 years of brutal struggle, the First Punic War. For Rome, it was a new kind of war. Rome had never been a naval power. Its legions could march across mountains and fields, but at sea they were helpless. Carthage, by contrast, commanded fleets as effortlessly as Rome commanded land. At first, Carthage dominated. Roman soldiers drowned, their ships splintered beneath Carthaginian rams. The sea was Carthage's realm, and Rome seemed outmatched. But Rome had a gift Carthage underestimated: the gift of adaptation. Captured ships were studied, copied, rebuilt in Roman shipyards. The Romans added a device of their own invention, the corvus, a boarding bridge with a heavy spike. When Roman ships grappled with Carthaginian triremes, They dropped the corvus, turning sea battles into land battles upon wooden decks. And there the Roman soldier excelled. Battle after battle, Rome learned. They endured defeats, rebuilt fleets, and pressed on. Carthage, for all its naval brilliance, began to falter under the weight of Roman persistence. At last, in 241 BCE, Carthage sued for peace. Rome had triumphed. Sicily became Rome's first overseas province. Carthage was forced to pay a crushing indemnity. It was a humiliation Carthage would not forget. And among those who remembered most bitterly was a general named Hamilcar Barca. Hamilcar Barca. Hamilcar was everything Carthage needed in defeat. Bold, ruthless, cunning. He had fought Rome with skill, harrying their legions even in Sicily. Though peace had been signed, his hatred of Rome burned undimmed. When mercenaries, unpaid after the war, rose in revolt against Carthage in the so-called Truceless War, Hamilcar crushed them with savage efficiency. Carthage's survival had been tested and proven, but Hamilcar saw that Carthage could not hope to challenge Rome again on the same battlefield. The Mediterranean was lost. Sicily was gone. The indemnities bled the treasury. Carthage would need new strength, new wealth, new armies. And so Hamilcar turned west to Spain. Carthage in Spain. Spain was rich beyond measure. Its mountains glittered with silver. Its fields yielded grain. Its tribes were fierce warriors eager for gold. Hamilcar marched there with his family, his soldiers, and his ambition. City after city fell. Mines poured silver into Carthage's coffers. Iberian warriors swelled Carthage's armies. There, in the campfires of Spain, in the clash of spears and the smoke of sacrifice, a boy grew at his father's side. His name was Hannibal, the Oath of Hannibal. One story, preserved by the Roman historian Livy, captures the moment that would define a lifetime. Hamilcar, preparing to march, brought his young son to the altar. He bade Hannibal lay his hand upon the sacrifice and swear an oath that he would never be a friend to Rome. The boy agreed. He swore eternal enmity, a vow before gods and fire, a vow that would echo across decades. Hannibal was perhaps only 9 years old, yet from that moment his destiny was bound. Hannibal's education. Under his father, Hannibal learned not only the arts of war, but the arts of command. He marched with soldiers, slept in the dust of camps, endured the hardships of campaign. He learned to ride, to fight, to speak with Iberian chiefs, to inspire men of every tongue to follow him. When Hamilcar died, drowned, some said, in battle against a rebel tribe, command passed to Hasdrubal, Hannibal's brother-in-law. Hasdrubal was more diplomat than warrior, skilled in forging alliances. He strengthened Carthage's power in Spain, founding the city of New Carthage, Carthago Nova, as the capital of their growing dominion. Yet always Hannibal was there, learning, growing, waiting. And when Hasdrubal was assassinated, the soldiers clamored for Hannibal to lead. He was still young, perhaps 25, but the men adored him. He shared their hardships, fought at their side, spoke their languages. The Council of Carthage approved. Hannibal Barca became commander-in-chief of the armies in Spain. Rome would soon learn the weight of his oath, the spark of war. Between Rome and Carthage now stood a fragile peace. Rome, wary of Carthaginian growth in Spain, had forced them to agree to a boundary, the Ebro River. Carthage would not cross it. Rome, in turn, would respect Carthaginian dominion south of it. But near that boundary lay the city of Saguntum, an ally of Rome, though south of the Ebro. A contradiction, a challenge, a spark waiting for a flame. Hannibal did not hesitate. He besieged Saguntum. The city fought bravely, but after 8 months it fell. Its walls were torn down, its people slaughtered or enslaved.
Rome demandait Hannibales surrendé.
Carthage refused. And so, in 218 BCE, the Second Punic War began, the war that would bring Hannibal to the gates of Rome itself. The stage is set. Traveler, we have reached the threshold. Carthage, once humbled, has found new strength in Spain. Hannibal, son of Hamilcar, has sworn eternal hatred. Saguntum lies in ruins. Rome has declared war, and the Mediterranean holds its breath. Ahead lies one of the most astonishing campaigns in human history. A march not merely across miles, but across the impossible. Rivers, mountains, snow, and the hearts of men. Ahead lies Hannibal's war. But tonight, let us rest here at the end of the first chapter. We have seen Carthage rise and fall, Rome triumph and threaten, a boy swear vengeance, and a city burn. The die is cast. When we meet again, we will march with Hannibal across Gaul, across the Alps, into the heart of Italy. Elephants will climb mountains, avalanches will bury men, and the legend of Hannibal will truly begin. Rest well, for the journey grows perilous. Good evening once more, traveler. When last we spoke, we stood in Spain watching a city fall. Saguntum burned, Rome demanded justice, and Carthage refused. War had been declared, and at the center of it all stood Hannibal Barca. Young, unyielding, bound by oath, ready to challenge the might of Rome. Tonight, we follow him on one of the most daring marches in the history of war. We will see rivers flood, tribes rise, mountains crack beneath snow, elephants tread where no army had dared. We will watch an impossible journey unfold, the march across the Alps. Hannibal's vision. Hannibal understood that to fight Rome in Spain or Africa was to play by Rome's rules. Rome could send fleets, block harbors, besiege cities. Rome's armies could grind down Carthaginian forces in endless war. But Hannibal sought something greater, something audacious. He would strike at the heart. He would carry the war not to Carthage's doorstep, but to Rome's. And so he conceived a plan as bold as it was perilous. March his army out of Spain, across southern Gaul, over the towering Alps, and into Italy itself. No foreign general had ever attempted such a thing. Most would have called it madness, but Hannibal called it destiny. The army assembled. From New Carthage, Hannibal gathered his forces. 90,000 infantry, hardened Iberians and Libyans, veterans of countless campaigns. 12,000 cavalry, swift Numidians famed for their speed, Iberians with heavy lances, Carthaginians with discipline and steel, and most famously 37 war elephants. Beasts brought from Africa, armored and trained, their very sight enough to terrify enemies and used to their thunderous charge. This army was not only soldiers, but peoples. Carthage's strength lay in diversity. Men of many tongues, many gods, united under Hannibal's banner. They did not march only for pay, but for loyalty to a general who shared their hardships, who ate as they ate, who fought as they fought. It was more than an army. It was a family bound by ambition, ready to follow Hannibal into the unknown. Crossing the Pyrenees. The march began in the spring of 218 BCE. First came the Pyrenees, the jagged mountains that divide Spain from Gaul. Hannibal left behind garrisons to secure Carthage's new dominions, but still his columns stretched like a river of steel. Tribes resisted, ambushing his forces. Hannibal fought them off, offering clemency to those who submitted, fire to those who did not. Step by step, he carved a path northward. By the time he emerged into Gaul, his army was smaller, perhaps 60,000 men, but hardened, tempered by mountain winds. The Rhône River. Ahead lay the Rhône, wide and swift, its waters glistening beneath the summer sun. Beyond it stretched Gaulish tribes, some hostile, some wary, some willing to bargain. Rome had expected Hannibal to linger in Spain, perhaps to fight a slow war there. Instead, he moved with astonishing speed. Roman forces under Publius Cornelius Scipio landed at Massilia, modern Marseille, hoping to intercept him, but Hannibal had already crossed. The crossing of the Rhône became legend. Hannibal gathered rafts, bound barrels, lashed together logs. Men swam across with ropes in their teeth. Horses were dragged through the waters, struggling against the current. And then came the elephants. How to move giants across a rushing river. Hannibal ordered massive rafts built, covered with earth to resemble solid ground. The elephants, reluctant at first, were driven onto the platforms. As the rafts were pulled across, some panicked, plunging into the water. Yet even in chaos, their size saved them. Trunks raised like snorkels, they swam to shore, emerging dripping but alive. When the last elephant set foot on the far bank, Hannibal's army cheered. They had crossed the Rhône. Rome had been outmaneuvered, the Gauls. But the river was only the beginning. Ahead lay hundreds of miles of hostile territory. Gaul was not a single nation but a patchwork of tribes, some friendly to Carthage, others bitter enemies. Hannibal, ever the diplomat, met them with gifts, promises, and threats. Some opened their gates. Others resisted and were crushed. One tribe, the Allobroges, barred his passage through a narrow gorge. Hannibal waited until night, then led a surprise attack. The Gauls were routed, their chief slain, the pass cleared. Again and again, Hannibal showed the same cunning. Strike fast, strike hard, offer mercy to the submissive, destruction to the defiant. His march was not only a military feat, but a political one, weaving alliances, breaking enemies, leaving behind a trail of awe. The Alps. At last, the Alps rose before them, white peaks like the teeth of gods, jagged, merciless, reaching into the sky. Snow glittered, avalanches thundered, winds howled through narrow passes. No army had ever attempted such a crossing with elephants, cavalry, and tens of thousands of men. Even the Gauls who guided Hannibal warned him of the danger. The mountains devoured armies, they said. Better to turn back. But Hannibal did not turn. He gathered his men and addressed them. He pointed across the peaks. Beyond those mountains, he declared, lies Italy. Beyond those peaks lies Rome herself. You have come this far for glory, for vengeance, for victory. One more trial and the prize is ours. The soldiers roared their assent. And so the climb began. The ascent. The path was narrow, treacherous. Men slipped on ice, plunging into chasms. Horses stumbled. Wagons splintered. Snow blinded eyes, frostbit fingers. Avalanches roared, burying camps in white death. Gaulish tribes harried them from above, hurling rocks, launching ambushes. Hannibal fought them off, always in the thick of danger, rallying his men when despair threatened to break them. Days turned to weeks. The army bled. Tens of thousands perished. Yet still they climbed higher and higher, until at last they stood upon the summit. From that height, Hannibal gathered his men once more. He pointed down into the green valleys beyond. There lies Italy, he cried. There lies the land we have come to conquer. The sight renewed their spirit. The descent began. The descent. If the climb was brutal, the descent was worse. Narrow paths crumbled beneath the weight of men and beasts. One trail collapsed entirely, plunging elephants and soldiers into the void. Hannibal ordered a new road cut into the mountainside, hacking through rock, pouring earth, forcing a passage where none had been. Blizzards struck. Men froze in their sleep, their corpses buried beneath snow. Yet Hannibal pressed on, refusing to yield. He shared the same rations as his men, walked on foot beside them, lifted their spirits with words and example. At last, after 15 harrowing days, the army emerged from the mountains. They had lost nearly half their numbers. Perhaps only 25,000 infantry and a fraction of the cavalry remained. Of the elephants, only a few still stood. But they had done the impossible. They had crossed the Alps into Italy. When news reached Rome that Hannibal had emerged in the Po Valley, panic spread. No one had believed he could make the journey. No one had thought an army could descend alive from those frozen peaks. But Hannibal had not only crossed. He had brought an army ready to fight. The Gauls of northern Italy, long resentful of Rome's dominance, flocked to his banner. Hannibal welcomed them, swelling his forces once more. What he had lost in the mountains, he regained in allies. Rome braced for war. Consuls raised armies. Legions marched north. Scouts spread across the land. But Rome had never faced a general like this before. The shadow falls. Traveler, pause for a moment and imagine it. The Romans, masters of Italy, heirs of victory, suddenly hear the impossible. Hannibal has crossed the Alps. He marches in their fields. His elephants thunder across their rivers. Fear spreads. Whispers echo in the forum. Mothers hush their children with his name. Hannibal is no longer just a man. He is a shadow, a storm, a terror from beyond the mountains. And the storm is coming closer. The next step. We leave Hannibal here, descending into the plains of Italy, gathering allies, preparing for battle. The Alps lie behind him, conquered. Ahead lies the greatest challenge of all. Rome's legions, iron-hearted, unyielding, waiting to defend their homeland. The first clash will soon come at the Trebia River. And there, Hannibal will show the Romans that his genius is not only in daring marches, but in battle itself. Rest well, traveler, for tomorrow the fields of Italy will run red. Hannibal has arrived. Sparkles, that is part 2, Hannibal's march across Gaul and the Alps in the same narrative style. Do you want me to continue directly into part 3, Trebia and Lake Trasimene, the first great clashes in Italy? Or should I expand this part further toward the full 3,000 words before moving forward?
Hai detto.
Go.
ChatGPT ha detto.
Perfect, traveler. Let us march on. Here is part 3 of the Hannibal script. His first great clashes with Rome in Italy. The Battle of the Trebia and the ambush at Lake Trasimene. Hannibal Part 3. Good evening once again, traveler. The Alps lie behind us, conquered at terrible cost. Hannibal has descended into Italy, his army battered but unbroken. Against all odds, he has achieved the impossible, and in doing so, he has struck terror into the heart of Rome. Tonight, we walk with him into battle. We will stand by the icy waters of the Trebia River, where cunning lured the legions to destruction. We will creep through the mists of Lake Trasimene, where an army vanished in ambush. We will see Rome, proud and unyielding, stagger beneath blows it had never thought possible. The plains of the Po. Italy lay before Hannibal. Rolling plains stretched across the north, rich farmland crisscrossed by rivers. But these fields were not empty. They were held by Rome and its allies. The Gallic tribes of the region had long chafed under Roman rule. Now, seeing Hannibal, they rose in rebellion, flocking to his banner. They saw in him not only a Carthaginian general, but a liberator who would free them from Rome's iron grip. Hannibal welcomed them eagerly. His numbers swelled once more, his cavalry strengthened, his army replenished. What he had lost in the mountains, he regained in loyalty and fire. But Rome was already moving. The consuls of 218 BCE, Publius Cornelius Scipio and Tiberius Sempronius Longus, each commanded a Roman army. They were determined to stop Hannibal before he could spread further. The clash at the Ticinus. The first meeting came near the Ticinus River, a tributary of the Publius Scipio led a Roman force, mostly cavalry, against Hannibal's horsemen. It was here that Hannibal's Numidian cavalry, swift, merciless, unmatched in mobility, first showed their worth. They harried the Romans, cut them down, forced Scipio himself to retreat wounded. His life, the stories tell, was saved by his young son, a boy who would grow to be Hannibal's greatest rival, Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus. Rome had been bloodied. Hannibal pressed on. The Trebia River, 218 BCE. Winter came. Snow fell across the plains. Rivers froze with icy currents. Yet Hannibal did not rest. He sought to draw the Romans into battle, and he knew how to do it. The consul Tiberius Sempronius Longus commanded the Roman army nearby. Hot-tempered, ambitious for glory, he longed for a decisive victory before his term of office ended. Hannibal would give him that chance, but on Hannibal's terms. Hannibal's plan. Hannibal chose the Trebia River as his battleground. He knew the river's freezing waters would sap the strength of any who crossed it. He placed his main force in plain view, ready to entice the Romans. But in a hidden hollow near the river, he concealed a detachment of cavalry and infantry under his brother Mago, a trap waiting to spring. The battle. At dawn, Hannibal sent his Numidian cavalry across the river to provoke the Romans. They taunted, hurled javelins, feigned retreat. Sempronius, eager for glory, ordered his men forward. The Romans waded through the icy waters of the Trebia, their bodies numbed, their spirits chilled. On the far bank, Hannibal's army waited. The clash was brutal. Elephants thundered into the Roman lines. Cavalry swept across the flanks. Infantry pressed from the front. And then, from behind, Mago's hidden troops burst forth, striking the Romans in the rear. Trapped, surrounded, the Roman army collapsed. Tens of thousands were slaughtered. The survivors fled through the snow, pursued by Hannibal's horsemen. Rome had suffered its first great disaster in Italy. The Trebia ran red with Roman blood. The aftermath. The news struck Rome like thunder. An entire consular army had been shattered. Hannibal had proven himself not only daring in march, but brilliant in battle. Yet Rome did not yield. Defeat could wound Rome, but it could not break her. The Senate rallied, new armies were raised, and the struggle continued. But Hannibal pressed his advantage. He marched southward, deeper into Italy, spreading destruction, gathering allies, always seeking to bring Rome itself to ruin. And soon he would strike again, in a battle that would be remembered as one of the greatest ambushes in history. Lake Trasimene, 217 BCE. Spring came, and with it, Hannibal's march into Etruria. The land was rich, fertile, and vulnerable. Rome sent another consul, Gaius Flaminius, to stop him. Flaminius was bold, impulsive, hungry for glory. Hannibal knew how to use that against him. The trap. Hannibal chose the shores of Lake Trasimene for his ambush. A narrow road wound between the lake on one side and steep hills on the other. In the dead of night, Hannibal placed his troops upon those hills. Infantry hidden in the woods, cavalry concealed in the gullies, ready to descend like wolves. At dawn, he left a small force visible, as bait, luring Flaminius forward. The ambush. The Roman column marched unsuspecting along the shore, the morning fog thick, blinding their sight. Suddenly, horns blared. From the hills, Hannibal's army erupted. Infantry crashed down from the slopes. Cavalry swept from hidden passes. The bait force turned to attack. The Romans were caught in a trap with no escape. The lake on one side, Hannibal's army on the other. Panic spread. Legionaries stumbled in confusion, some driven into the waters, drowning beneath their own shields. Others were cut down where they stood. Flaminius himself was slain in the chaos. It was a massacre. As many as 15,000 Romans fell. The rest were captured or scattered. The aftermath. The news shook Rome to its core. Never before had an entire Roman army been annihilated so completely, so suddenly. Fear spread through the city. Whispers filled the streets. Hannibal was invincible, a monster sent by the gods, a shadow of doom creeping ever closer. The Senate, desperate, turned to an old man with a cautious mind, Quintus Fabius Maximus. He would be given supreme authority as dictator. His strategy was not to fight Hannibal in open battle, but to delay, to harass, to deny him the chance for another decisive victory. Rome called him Cunctator, the delayer, and in patience lay Rome's only hope. The shadow deepens. Traveler, we have stood by the Trebia and watched Rome's pride drowned in icy waters. We have walked the mists of Trasimene and seen legions vanish in ambush. Hannibal, with cunning and genius, has struck two crushing blows. Rome is shaken but not broken, and Hannibal hungers for more. Ahead lies the greatest battle of all. A field where Rome will gather its largest army yet, confident in its numbers, certain of victory. But there, Hannibal will achieve his masterpiece. That place is Cannae, and there the ground will be soaked in Roman blood as never before. Rest now, traveler, for tomorrow we walk into Hannibal's greatest triumph. Good evening once again, traveler. We have followed Hannibal from Spain to Italy, across rivers and mountains, through snow and blood. At the Trebia, he shattered a Roman army in icy waters. At Trasimene, he buried another in fog and ambush. Rome trembled, yet endured. Tonight, we come to the great reckoning, the battle that would forever echo through the halls of history. A battle studied by generals for centuries, feared by Rome for generations. This is Cannae, the masterpiece of Hannibal Barca.
Rome préparée.
By the year 216 BCE, Hannibal had been in Italy for 2 years. His victories had shaken Rome, but they had not broken her. The Senate knew they could not allow this shadow to linger. So they resolved upon a bold course. They would raise the largest army Rome had ever fielded. 8 legions, double the usual number, each supported by allies. In total, nearly 80,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry. A tidal wave of men, confident in their numbers, certain of their strength. The consuls of that year, Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, shared command. One cautious, the other reckless, they alternated authority by day. Rome's confidence swelled. Surely, with such overwhelming force, Hannibal would at last be crushed. Hannibal's army. Against this, Hannibal commanded perhaps 40,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry. Half Rome's numbers. Many would have retreated, avoided battle, sought safety in the hills. But Hannibal sought not safety but annihilation. He knew Rome's strength was in her numbers, her discipline, her refusal to surrender. To defeat Rome, he must not merely win battles. He must destroy armies so completely that Rome herself would break. Cannae, he would attempt just that. The field. The chosen ground was near the town of Cannae in Apulia, on the banks of the Aufidus River. The plain was wide and open, perfect for cavalry maneuvers. Grain fields stretched across the land, the summer sun beating down mercilessly. Here, Hannibal chose his position carefully. He placed his camp near the river, controlling access to water. He arranged his forces with deliberate cunning, shaping the battlefield before the battle had even begun. The deployment. On the morning of August 2nd, 216 BCE, the two armies faced one another beneath the blazing Italian sun. Hannibal's line was unorthodox. He placed his weakest troops, the Iberians and Gauls, in the center, arrayed in a crescent that bulged outward toward the Romans. Behind them stood his African infantry, disciplined, heavily armed, waiting. On the flanks, his cavalry, Iberians on the left, Numidians on the right. The Romans, confident in their numbers, deployed in massive depth. Legion upon legion pressed forward, their formation dense, a wall of shields and spears. Their cavalry, fewer in number, held the wings. The stage was set. The opening clash. The battle began with the cavalry. On Hannibal's left, Iberian and Gallic horsemen crashed into Rome's cavalry with savage fury. Blades clashed, horses screamed, men fell. Slowly, the Romans gave way. On Hannibal's right, the Numidians, nimble and elusive, harassed the Roman allies, luring them into pursuit, keeping them occupied, unable to assist. Meanwhile, in the center, the Roman infantry advanced. Their sheer weight of numbers drove into Hannibal's crescent, pushing it backward. The Gauls and Iberians strained, yielding ground, step by step, drawing the Romans deeper and deeper into the trap. The trap springs. As the Roman infantry pressed forward, their formation narrowed, funneled inward by the retreating crescent. They believed themselves on the verge of victory, driving the enemy before them. Then, at Hannibal's signal, the African infantry on the flanks wheeled inward. Suddenly, the Romans found themselves struck from both sides. The Africans, fresh and disciplined, slammed into their flanks like iron jaws. At the same time, Hannibal's cavalry, having routed Rome's horsemen, swept around the rear. The Romans were surrounded. The slaughter, what followed was not battle but massacre. Trapped on every side, pressed so tightly they could scarcely raise their arms, the Romans were cut down where they stood. For hours, the killing continued. The summer sun beat down upon a field of horror. Blood slicked the earth, corpses piled high, screams filled the air. Entire cohorts were annihilated without ever striking a blow. When the slaughter ended, as many as 50,000 Romans lay dead. Senators, knights, consuls, men of every rank. Another 10,000 were captured. Hannibal had destroyed the largest army Rome had ever fielded. It was Rome's darkest day, a disaster so complete that even centuries later, the word Cannae would mean utter annihilation. Rome trembles. When news reached Rome, the city was plunged into despair. Women wailed in the streets, mourning husbands and sons. The Senate ordered mourning for months, black cloth draping the forum. Allies wavered. Many southern Italian cities, seeing Rome broken, defected to Hannibal. Even mighty Capua, second only to Rome itself, opened its gates to him. For a moment, it seemed as if Rome's end had come. Never before had she suffered such a defeat. Never before had her armies been so utterly destroyed. Hannibal's choice. And yet, Hannibal did not march on Rome. His generals urged him to do so, to seize the city while it lay vulnerable. But Hannibal refused. Rome, he knew, was not merely a city, but a fortress of spirit. Its walls were strong, its people resolute. To attack without proper siege equipment, without reinforcements, would be folly. Better to weaken Rome by stripping away her allies, bleeding her strength, breaking her will over time. It was a decision debated for centuries. Could Hannibal have ended the war then and there? Or was he right to bide his time? History offers no clear answer. The legacy of Cannae. Cannae was more than a victory. It was a masterpiece of strategy, a perfect envelopment, studied by generals from Frederick the Great to Napoleon to Schlieffen. But for Hannibal, it was also a turning point. For though he had crushed Rome in battle, he could not crush her spirit. Rome refused to yield. The Senate forbade negotiation. New legions were raised, even from slaves and criminals, bound by oath to fight until death. Rome had been brought to her knees, but she would not bow. The shadow grows. Traveler, we have stood upon the field of Cannae, where 80,000 Romans met 40,000 Carthaginians, and where Rome's pride drowned in blood. We have seen Hannibal at the height of his genius, a master of war unmatched in cunning and courage. And yet, this was not the end. Rome still breathed, and in the years to come, Hannibal would march across Italy, seeking allies, seeking victory, while Rome clung to survival with grim determination. Ahead lies a war not of single battles, but of endurance. A war of patience, attrition, and will. Hannibal will win more victories, but Rome will refuse to die. Rest now, traveler, for when we return, we will follow Hannibal through the long years in Italy, as the shadow deepens, and the struggle between Carthage and Rome grinds on. Good evening again, traveler. We have stood with Hannibal upon the killing fields of Cannae, where Rome's pride fell beneath his genius. We have watched as legions were surrounded and slaughtered, as the Republic trembled, as allies wavered and fear spread like fire. But Rome did not fall. The gates of the city remained closed, the Senate unbroken, the people resolute. Hannibal, though victorious, found himself in a war that would not end with a single battle. It became a war of endurance, of patience, of allies gained and lost, of years spent marching across Italy, always feared, always deadly, yet never triumphant. Tonight, we follow Hannibal through those long years, when his shadow loomed across the Republic but could never quite extinguish its flame. The aftermath of Cannae. After Cannae, Rome was reeling. Nearly 50,000 men lay dead. Entire noble families had lost sons, brothers, fathers. Yet Rome's spirit, though shaken, was not broken. The Senate forbade mourning for the dead, declaring that Rome must look forward, not backward. Even in despair, they raised new legions. Boys barely of age, slaves promised freedom, criminals offered redemption. Every citizen who could bear arms was pressed into service. Rome would not negotiate. No peace envoys were sent. The Senate's answer to Hannibal's triumph was simple. Rome will fight on. Hannibal gains allies. Hannibal, meanwhile, sought to turn victory into dominance. He knew he could not storm Rome itself without siege equipment and reinforcements. Instead, he turned to diplomacy, hoping to strip Rome of her allies. And for a time, it worked. Many cities of southern Italy defected. Capua, proud and wealthy, opened its gates to him. In the south, the Greek cities of Tarentum and others looked to Hannibal as a liberator. The Gauls of the north remained loyal to him, their hatred of Rome unshaken. Yet not all were so eager. Much of central Italy held firm. The Latin allies, bound to Rome by loyalty and fear alike, refused to abandon her. Rome's greatest strength, her web of alliances, bent but did not break. The War of Fabius. Even before Cannae, Rome had turned to Quintus Fabius Maximus. His strategy had been mocked at first. Avoid pitched battle, harass Hannibal's foragers, deny him supplies, let time and hunger weaken him. Romans called him coward, branded him cunctator, the delayer, but after Cannae, Fabius seemed vindicated. Rome could not match Hannibal in open battle. They must wear him down. So Rome shadowed Hannibal wherever he marched, always close enough to harass, never close enough to be destroyed. Crops were burned to starve him, supplies cut off, roads blocked. Hannibal raged at this phantom war. He longed for battle, for the chance to crush another Roman army. But Fabius denied him. The war became a grind, not of decisive victories, but of attrition. Hannibal in Campania. For years, Hannibal moved across Italy, into Campania, into Apulia, into Bruttium. His elephants were gone, his army smaller, but his genius endured. Time and again, he outmaneuvered Roman commanders, lured them into traps, struck at their flanks, escaped their encirclements. At Capua, he wintered in luxury, his men resting, feasting, recovering. Some later claimed this was his downfall, that indulgence sapped the discipline of his army. But when spring came, Hannibal marched once more, his resolve unbroken. He even rode to the very gates of Rome itself. In 211 BCE, with Roman armies pressing him in the south, Hannibal struck north, appearing suddenly before the city. Panic erupted. Women prayed in temples. Men armed themselves upon the walls. Hannibal's cavalry rode within sight of the gates. Yet he did not attack. Rome's defenses were too strong, her walls too high, her spirit too fierce. Hannibal could threaten but not seize the eternal city. The long grind. As years passed, the war turned against Hannibal.
Rome adapted.
Commanders learned from their defeats, cautious where once they were reckless. The Senate poured resources into Spain and Sicily, cutting off Hannibal's lifelines. Slowly, Rome tightened its grip. Cities that had defected were besieged and punished. Capua, once Hannibal's prize, fell back to Rome in 211 BCE. Its leaders were executed, its people enslaved, its glory erased. Tarentum too was retaken, its betrayal avenged. One by one, Hannibal's allies dwindled, leaving him isolated in the south. Yet still he endured. For more than a decade, he held out in Italy, a lion surrounded by hunters, striking when he could, retreating when he must, never captured, never defeated outright. Hannibal the commander. What kept his army loyal through these long years? It was Hannibal himself. He shared his men's hardships, marched beside them, endured hunger and cold without complaint. He was stern but fair, generous in reward, ruthless in punishment. He inspired devotion not through fear alone, but through respect. He also understood the value of culture and diplomacy. Speaking to Gauls, he wore their dress and joined their feasts. Among Greeks, he honored their gods. To each people, he became one of their own. It was this chameleon nature that bound such a diverse army together. And above all, his genius never dimmed. Even in decline, even when outnumbered, he won victories. In 212 BCE, he destroyed a Roman army at Herdonia. In 210, another at the same place. Each triumph reminded Rome that Hannibal was still a predator in their land. The shadow of time. But time, traveler, is the one enemy no general can outwit. As years passed, Hannibal's position grew weaker. His brother Hasdrubal, who had campaigned in Spain, was killed at the Metaurus in 207 BCE, his army destroyed before it could join Hannibal in Italy. Hasdrubal's severed head was hurled into Hannibal's camp, a grim message that reinforcements would never come. With Spain lost, with Sicily secured, with allies fading, Hannibal's dream of crushing Rome began to dim. He remained undefeated on Italian soil, but victory slipped ever further from his grasp.
Rome endure.
Rome, battered but unbroken, proved her greatest strength was not in generals or battles, but in endurance. Again and again she lost armies, but again and again she raised new ones. Where other states would have surrendered, Rome refused. The Republic endured fire and famine, humiliation and despair, yet always stood again. Hannibal had come to Italy to break Rome's will. Instead, Rome's will proved stronger than any sword. The turning tide. Traveler, we have walked with Hannibal through the long war in Italy. We have seen him march from north to south, when allies lose them, threaten Rome itself, endure year after year as a shadow over the Republic. We have seen Rome adapt, recover, and outlast his brilliance. But Hannibal's time in Italy was drawing to a close. Rome had found a new commander, young, daring, brilliant, who would carry the war not in Italy, but in Spain and Africa. His name was Publius Cornelius Scipio, and with him the tide of the war would turn. Rest now, traveler, for when we return, we will follow Rome's rising star, Scipio Africanus, and watch as the war shifts away from Hannibal's hands toward the final reckoning at Zama. Good evening once again, traveler. We have marched with Hannibal through triumph and endurance, through Trebia, Trasimene, Cannae, and the long years across Italy. We have watched Rome stagger but never fall, her spirit unbroken. Tonight, we turn our gaze away from Hannibal's campfires in Italy, across the seas to Spain, where another destiny unfolds. Here, a young Roman commander learns the art of war, rises from tragedy, and begins the counterstrike that will turn the tide of history. His name is Publius Cornelius Scipio, the man who will become Hannibal's greatest rival, the man who will bring the final reckoning at Zama. Spain, Rome's new battlefield. After the First Punic War, Carthage had built its new empire in Spain. The silver mines of Iberia filled its coffers. Its fierce warriors filled Carthage's armies. Hannibal himself had risen there, sworn his oath, forged his power. Now, Rome understood that to defeat Hannibal, they must cut off his roots. So while Hannibal raged in Italy, Rome sent armies to Spain to break Carthage's hold. First, it went poorly. 2 Roman commanders, both named Publius and Gnaeus Scipio, father and uncle of the young Scipio, fought bravely in Spain but were killed in 211 BCE. Carthage seemed triumphant, yet from this disaster rose a new hope. The son of Publius Cornelius Scipio, barely 24 years old, volunteered to take command. Many doubted him, for his youth was great, his experience little. But the Senate, desperate, agreed, and so Scipio the younger sailed to Spain. Scipio in Spain. From the beginning, Scipio showed qualities rare in a Roman commander. He inspired his men not through fear, but through charisma. He spoke with eloquence, promising victory, binding his army to him with loyalty and admiration. He struck boldly where others hesitated. In 209 BCE, he launched a daring assault on New Carthage, Carthago Nova, the heart of Carthaginian power in Spain. Marching swiftly, he arrived before the city before the defenders could prepare. While his main force attacked the walls, a secret detachment waded through the shallow lagoon at low tide, storming the defenses from the rear. The city fell in a single day. Inside, Scipio gained not only supplies and hostages, but Spain's vast silver mines and Carthage's treasury. It was a blow from which Carthage would never fully recover. The genius of Scipio. Scipio was more than bold. He was merciful where Rome was often cruel. When the city's hostages, women of noble families, were captured, Scipio protected them, sending them home unharmed. This act won him allies among the Spanish tribes, who saw in him not a conqueror, but a friend. He also learned from Hannibal. He studied his enemy's tactics, his use of ambush, his reliance on cavalry, his psychological warfare. Scipio became not merely a Roman general, but a student of Carthage's greatest son. The battles of Spain. Over the next years, Scipio fought Carthage's generals again and again. At Becula, he defeated Hasdrubal Barca, though Hasdrubal escaped to march toward Italy, only to die at the Metaurus, his head sent to Hannibal's camp. At Ilipa in 206 BCE, Scipio achieved his own masterpiece. Facing a larger Carthaginian army, he used deception and cunning. 4 days, he arranged his forces with the same deployment. Romans in the center, Spanish allies on the wings. The Carthaginians grew accustomed, expecting the pattern to repeat. Then, on the day of battle, Scipio reversed it. He placed his strongest troops, the Romans, on the wings, and his weaker allies in the center. When battle began, The Roman wings crushed Carthage's flanks, enveloping their army just as Hannibal had done at Cannae. The victory was complete. Spain was lost to Carthage. The fall of Spain. With Spain gone, Carthage lost its mines, its supplies, its recruiting ground. Hannibal, stranded in Italy, could no longer be reinforced. Carthage itself lay vulnerable. Scipio returned to Rome in triumph. He was hailed as a hero, though some senators still doubted his youth. Yet the people adored him, and the army worshipped him. When Scipio proposed to carry the war to Africa itself, striking at Carthage directly, the Senate hesitated. The risk was great, but Scipio's charisma prevailed. He was granted permission, and soon his fleet sailed south. The war shifts. In Africa, Scipio found allies among the Numidians, famed horsemen of the desert. Their king, Syphax, at first leaned toward Carthage. But another prince, Massinissa, admired Scipio's courage and joined Rome. With Numidian cavalry at his side, Scipio gained the mobility to match even Hannibal's veterans. Carthage, alarmed, recalled its exiled general. Hannibal Barca, after nearly 15 years in Italy, was summoned home. The stage was set for the final confrontation. Scipio and Hannibal, Rome and Carthage, the duel that would decide the fate of the Mediterranean. The tide turns. Traveler, we have left Hannibal in the south of Italy, holding on though his dream fades. We have crossed the seas to Spain, where Scipio has risen from youth to greatness, conquering Carthage's empire, mastering the art of war, winning allies with mercy and boldness. Now we stand upon the edge of the final act. Hannibal returns to Africa, weary but unbroken. Scipio follows, burning with destiny. The last great battle approaches, Zama, where two of history's greatest generals will meet face to face. Rest now, traveler, for when we return, the sands of Africa will quake beneath armies, and the fate of Rome and Carthage will be decided. Good evening again, traveler. We have walked long upon this road, across the Alps, through the blood of Cannae, into the long years in Italy, and across the seas to Spain, where Scipio rose like a dawn against Carthage's fading star. Now we come to the clash of titans. Hannibal and Scipio, two masters of war, two rivals bound by fate, will at last stand face to face upon the plains of Africa. Tonight we march toward Zama. Hannibal summoned. For more than 15 years, Hannibal had fought in Italy, unbeaten in open battle, yet unable to strike the killing blow. His hope lay in reinforcements, in brothers and allies, but they were gone. Then came the summons. Carthage itself was under threat. Scipio had landed in Africa, forging alliances with Numidia, striking at Carthage's heart. The Senate of Carthage, fearful and desperate, recalled their greatest son. Hannibal obeyed. With heavy heart, he abandoned Italy, the land where his victories had shaken Rome. He sailed home, bringing with him what remained of his veterans, men hardened by decades of war, loyal beyond death. Scipio in Africa. Meanwhile, Scipio had wasted no time. He had defeated Carthage's allies, burned camps, shattered armies. His boldness astonished even his own men. Where others hesitated, Scipio struck. Where others demanded cruelty, Scipio offered mercy, binding peoples to him with trust. Most crucial of all, he secured Numidia. Massinissa, the horse lord of the desert, joined him with thousands of cavalry. With their speed and skill, Scipio could at last match and surpass Hannibal's mounted arm. Carthage sued for peace, but when terms proved too harsh, they turned again to war. And so Hannibal returned to command. The meeting of generals. Before battle, the two men met. Accounts tell us they spoke face to face, each recognizing greatness in the other. Hannibal, older now, weary yet wise, warned Scipio of fortune's cruelty. "I have seen victory and defeat," he said. "Let us make peace before fate decides for us." But Scipio, young and confident, refused. He believed destiny was his. Peace was no longer possible. The time had come for the final reckoning. The armies at Zama, 202 BCE. The two armies gathered upon the plains near Zama. Hannibal's force numbered perhaps 40,000 infantry and 4,000 cavalry, bolstered by 80 war elephants. His veterans from Italy stood in reserve, unbroken and battle-hardened. Before them, layers of less reliable troops formed the first and second lines. Scipio's army counted around 30,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry, including the invaluable Numidians under Massinissa. His legions, disciplined and confident, had studied Hannibal's ways and prepared to counter them. The stage was set. The world held its breath. The elephants charge. At dawn, the battle began. Hannibal unleashed his elephants, thundering across the plain, tusks gleaming, trunks raised in fury. But Scipio was ready. He had arranged his legions in open lanes. At the signal, trumpets blared, drums roared, terrifying the beasts. Many elephants panicked, veering aside into Carthage's own lines. Others charged down the lanes, harmless, harassed by Roman skirmishers until they fled. The mighty beasts, once Hannibal's terror, had failed. The cavalry clash. On the wings, the cavalry met. Massinissa's Numidians hurled javelins, wheeled, and charged again, their speed unmatched. Hannibal's horsemen fought fiercely, but they were driven back. Pursued across the plain, they vanished from the field. For now, the infantry stood alone. The infantry struggle. Hannibal's first line, raw recruits and mercenaries, clashed with the Roman front. They fought hard, but discipline faltered. When they began to give way, Hannibal ordered the second line to hold firm, but mistrust and confusion spread. Some units refused to let retreating comrades through, chaos erupting between Carthage's own troops. Scipio pressed forward, steady, relentless. His legions advanced in order, grinding down the enemy. Finally, Hannibal unleashed his veterans, the men of Italy, hardened by years of war, undefeated in countless battles. They struck like a hammer, halting Rome's advance, forcing the legions back step by step. For a moment, it seemed Hannibal might yet turn the tide. The final encirclement. But then, from the horizon, the thunder of hooves returned. Massinissa and Laelius, commanding the Roman cavalry, had driven Hannibal's horsemen from the field. Now they swept back upon the rear of the Carthaginian army. The trap was sprung. The very maneuver Hannibal had perfected at Cannae was turned against him. Carthage's army was surrounded. The slaughter began. The defeat. Hannibal fought with grim resolve, rallying his veterans, refusing to flee. But the day was lost. Tens of thousands of his men fell where they stood. The survivors scattered. Hannibal, his cloak torn, his heart heavy, retreated to Carthage. He had fought his last great battle, the end of Carthage's power. The war was over. Carthage sued for peace. Scipio, now hailed as Africanus, dictated harsh terms. Carthage must surrender its fleet, pay vast indemnities, and never again wage war without Rome's consent. Hannibal had given everything: genius, courage, endurance, but Rome's will had proven stronger. Carthage was broken, the shadow of Zama. Traveler, we have stood upon the field of Zama, where two of history's greatest generals met in final combat. We have watched Hannibal's elephants fail, his cavalry scatter, his veterans surrounded. We have seen Scipio, the student of Hannibal, surpass the master. This was the end of Hannibal's war, but not the end of Hannibal. For though Carthage was humbled, Hannibal would not vanish. He would rise again, not with armies, but with politics and exile, still defying Rome until the very end. Rest now, traveler, for when we return, we will follow Hannibal into the last chapters of his life. The exile, the wandering, the final defiance of a man who refused to bow. Good evening once more, traveler. The fields of Zama are silent now. The legions of Rome have triumphed. Scipio Africanus has returned home in glory. Carthage is humbled, her fleet surrendered, her tribute heavy, her spirit broken, and yet Hannibal still lives. The man who had crossed the Alps, who had destroyed armies, who had shaken the world, still walks among us. His sword may be laid aside, but his mind, his will, his hatred of Rome burn undimmed. Tonight, we follow him through the long years of exile, through politics and intrigue, through distant courts and foreign wars, until the day when death itself became his last act of defiance. Hannibal the statesman. After Zama, Carthage lay in ruin. Many expected Hannibal to be executed or cast aside. Instead, the people turned to him once more, not as a general, but as a statesman. In 196 BCE, Hannibal was elected Suffete, the highest magistrate of Carthage. Once this office had been weak, but Hannibal revived it with energy. He reformed the courts, broke the corruption of the oligarchs, forced nobles to repay stolen funds, and reorganized Carthage's finances. Under his leadership, Carthage paid Rome's crushing indemnities far faster than expected. Prosperity began to return. The city, once broken, rose again. But this very success alarmed Rome. They whispered, "If Hannibal lives, Carthage will rise again." Rome's fear. Roman envoys accused Hannibal of plotting another war. They demanded his surrender. The Senate of Carthage, weak and fearful, considered betraying him to Rome. Hannibal knew what was coming. He would not wait to be handed over. In the dead of night, he fled Carthage, slipping into exile, a wanderer without a home. Thus began the last journey of Hannibal Barca. Hannibal in the east. Hannibal's fame was such that even in exile, kings sought him. He traveled first to the court of Antiochus III, the great king of the Seleucid Empire in Syria. Antiochus dreamed of challenging Rome for control of Greece and Asia, and Hannibal offered his counsel. But the proud king did not fully trust the Carthaginian exile. Though Hannibal advised bold action, Antiochus hesitated. When war with Rome came, it ended in defeat. At the Battle of Magnesia in 190 BCE, Antiochus was crushed. Once more, Hannibal's hopes of striking at Rome vanished. The wanderer. From Syria, Hannibal fled again to Crete, to Bithynia, to the far corners of the Hellenistic world. Everywhere he went, Rome's envoys followed, demanding his surrender. Everywhere, kings sheltered him for a time, then turned cold under Roman pressure. Yet Hannibal never ceased plotting. He built fleets for allies, designed new weapons, trained armies, always seeking some way, any way, to wound the republic that had haunted his life. The last refuge. At last, Hannibal found refuge in the court of Prusias of Bithynia, a small kingdom on the Black Sea. There, even in his 60s, he remained a strategist. When Prusias went to war against Pergamum, Hannibal advised him, devising clever tricks, even hurling jars of venomous snakes onto enemy ships to spread panic. But Rome's shadow reached even here. Envoys demanded his surrender once more. Prusias, fearful of Rome's wrath, wavered. Scipio became one of history's greatest rivalries. Two men, alike in genius yet opposite in fortune. Scipio triumphed, yet always honored his foe. After Zama, he spoke of Hannibal with respect, recognizing in him the equal who had sharpened Rome's steel. And Hannibal himself, in exile, once ranked history's greatest generals for King Antiochus. Alexander the Great first, Pyrrhus of Epirus second, and himself Hannibal third. When asked whom he would place if he defeated Scipio, he smiled. Then I would place Hannibal before them all. Even in rivalry, there was admiration. Two titans bound by destiny. Hannibal the symbol. Beyond history, Hannibal became myth. For some, he was a monster, cruel, relentless, a scourge of Italy. For others, he was a hero, a man who dared to challenge the giant, who fought for his homeland against impossible odds. In later ages, writers, poets, and statesmen invoked his name. To nationalists, he was the symbol of defiance against empire. To generals, the master of battle. To enemies of Rome, the eternal inspiration. Hannibal became not merely a man, but a symbol of courage, of genius, of tragedy. The tragedy of Hannibal. And what, traveler, is Hannibal's true legacy? Is it victory? No. Rome triumphed. Is it conquest? No. Carthage was destroyed. It is tragedy. The tragedy of a man whose genius reached the very brink of triumph, but never crossed it. The tragedy of an oath sworn too young, a hatred carried too long. The tragedy of a life that shook the world, yet ended in exile, alone, with poison in his hand. This is why we remember him, not only as the greatest of Carthaginians, but as one of the greatest of mortals, caught in the web of fate. The eternal name. Traveler, we have walked far. We have seen Hannibal's rise and fall, his victories and defeats, his genius and his tragedy. And now we see his legacy, the fear he planted in Rome, the lessons he left for generals, the memory that endured long after his death. Hannibal Barca. Even in defeat, his name endures. Even in death, his shadow walks beside us. Good evening, traveler. We have walked with Hannibal from his childhood oath to his lonely death, through triumphs and tragedies, through the thunder of battle and the silence of exile. His story has ended, yet the consequences of his war had only just begun. For Hannibal did not merely fight Rome. He forged her. He broke her illusions, tested her spirit, and in doing so, transformed her from a republic of Italy into the master of the Mediterranean. Tonight, we look at the world that followed Hannibal, a world remade by his shadow. Rome forged in fire. Before Hannibal, Rome was strong but not unshakable. She had conquered Italy, but her power was still regional. Her armies were disciplined, but her strategies were blunt, reliant on numbers and brute force. Hannibal changed that. He forced Rome to adapt. At Trebia, Rome learned the cost of rashness. At Trasimene, the danger of ambush. At Cannae, the horror of overconfidence. Each disaster reshaped Rome. She grew cautious, patient, willing to endure long wars. Fabius the delayer became a model of strategy, teaching Rome the power of time. Scipio Africanus, student of Hannibal's own methods, turned Carthage's genius back upon her. Rome, battered, became sharper, harder, stronger. Hannibal had been her greatest enemy and her greatest teacher. The fall of Carthage. For Carthage, the legacy was ruin. Though she survived Hannibal's war, she did so as a shadow of herself. Tribute drained her coffers. Rome's demands strangled her ambitions. Yet Carthage recovered in trade, her merchants thriving once more. This prosperity ironically doomed her, for Rome could not tolerate a rival, however peaceful. And so came the Third Punic War. Cato the Elder ended every speech with the same words: Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. In 146 BCE, Rome obeyed. Carthage was besieged, stormed, and burned. Its people were slain or enslaved, its walls torn down, its harbor filled with rubble. The city Hannibal had fought for was erased. Only the memory remained, the Mediterranean redrawn. Hannibal's war was the hinge of history, Before it, the Mediterranean was contested, Carthage in the west, the Hellenistic kingdoms in the east, Rome rising but not supreme. After it, Rome's dominance was inevitable. Spain became Rome's. Carthage became dust. Greece fell under Roman sway. Egypt and the East soon followed. Within a century, the Mediterranean was not a sea of rivals, but a Roman lake, Mare Nostrum, our sea. The empire that would one day stretch from Britain to Syria, from the Rhine to the deserts of Africa, was born in the crucible of Hannibal's war. The Republic transformed. Hannibal did not just shape Rome's empire, he shaped Rome herself. The strain of his war left scars. Hundreds of thousands of Romans died in his battles. Whole generations of noble families were extinguished. Rome grew harsher, more pragmatic, less forgiving. Mercy became rare, fear more common. The Senate grew ever more powerful, armies larger, provinces richer. Ambition swelled, and with it corruption. Rome emerged victorious, but changed, no longer merely a republic of farmers and soldiers, but a state marching toward empire, conquest, and civil war. Some say Hannibal not only fought Rome, he planted the seeds of the Caesars, the eternal rival. And yet, even in victory, Rome could never erase Hannibal. His memory lingered like smoke after a fire. His name haunted Roman writers for centuries. Livy, Polybius, and others preserved his story, not as a cautionary tale only, but as a legend of greatness. In every triumphal parade, in every Senate debate, in every march of legions across the seas, Rome remembered the man who had once stood at her gates. Hannibal had not destroyed Rome, but he ensured Rome would never forget him. The final reflection. Traveler, we have walked a long road together. We have seen the boy swear an oath of hatred, the general march across mountains, the armies clash in fog and fire, the republic tremble, the exile wander, the poison burn. We have seen Rome reborn through suffering, Carthage destroyed, the Mediterranean redrawn. And through it all, we have seen Hannibal Barca, the man, the legend, the shadow. Hannibal's question. What is Hannibal's true legacy? Is it his genius in war, unmatched in brilliance? Is it his defiance, carrying hatred to the grave? Or is it the empire he forged for his enemy, the Rome that rose stronger because of him? Perhaps it is all these. Hannibal was not a victor, but he was never truly defeated. His victories lived on in Rome's memory, his spirit in the art of war, his defiance in the whispers of history, the eternal shadow. And so, traveler, we close this tale. The fires of Carthage are ashes now. The legions march on. The Mediterranean belongs to Rome. But somewhere, in the mists of memory, a boy still stands at an altar in Spain, laying his hand upon the sacrifice, swearing an oath never to be a friend to Rome. That oath echoes still. That shadow endures. That name will never fade. Hannibal,